Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to my brothers and sisters in Islam, and salam to all my brothers and sisters in humanity. This is Ali. I haven't really talked about philosophy in some time now, being that I've been really focused on, sort of trying to explain Islam and refuting some misconceptions. But to be honest, philosophy is one of my favorite pastimes, and it's been a while since I've been given an excuse to talk about things from a philosophical perspective. As many of you may know, uh, my primary college education has been in philosophy and philosophical studies. Um, Only recently have I decided to pursue graduate level studies in Islam. So this is really, a favorite pastime of mine. And the new excuse for me to talk about it um, is now the very prominent and very you know popular group called the League of Reason, as they like to call themselves, the League of Reason. Yes, and I use those quotations uh, in that manner for a reason. Now, Veritas 48, Telemantros, and others have already kind of talked about the how should I say, the lack of reason with the League of Reason's perspective on knowledge. I think they did a very good job. However, I want to really touch upon the practicality of their beliefs and how they are basically, essentially applied. Also, I want to talk about the morality behind them. So this is going to be my critique of the League of Reason. Um, First off, I think we all need to really understand what this sort of view of scientism, where it leads us, basically. Scientism is this belief, basically, that the arbiter of all truth or knowledge is science. Uh, if this is the case, then basically all other fields of knowledge that we learn about in the university, English, literature, uh, philosophy, political science, etc., is basically meaningless and stupid. Of course, they will argue back saying, no, we just need to apply scientific methodology to these fields, but that's practically impossible. Science does not deal with value judgments, as much as many people may try to, think this the case, or try to argue this. It never deals with value judgments, and it never will because it wasn't designed for that. It only deals with what things are and how they work, not necessarily what they are good for, what people should do and should not do. Uh, Oftentimes, you will hear people from the League of Reason claim the greatness of science and how it trumps philosophy and other such things because of what it produces. For instance, iPods and rocket ships and the internal combustion engine and weapons of mass destruction. That last one was, just a little tongue-in-cheek. But what they don't tell you is, what the value of these things are. Value is subjective, essentially. We only produce things and consider them valuable because of what we want to use them for, or what we think is good. But last time I checked, things like iPods and internal combustion engines and other such things, while they can produce many things, don't help to really increase the morality or the goodness of human society. Oftentimes you'll hear people from the League of Reason and those who follow this sort of line of thinking have this sort of chronological snobbery about them, saying things like, well, in the past people were less moral than we are today, when this is profoundly ignorant of history and human beings in general. I really don't see how they can think this way when today's world we just have greater means of killing people, and while we also have greater means of creating more food and vaccines, most of the world still suffers from the lack thereof. Because we don't make a profit off these things if we just give them away. So how they can have this mentality that somehow science is advancing human civilization in all its forms, I don't understand how they can think this way. Obviously, yes, technologically speaking, that may be the case, but morally speaking, that it hasn't made really much difference. We're no more or less moral than we were 2,000 years ago, as much as many people want to believe otherwise. So in a sense, this sort of view of scientism is not only profoundly ignorant of human history and the human condition, but it's also very impractical, and it also basically deals away with everything else that we consider to be knowledge. It just rids us of those things and considers them unworthy. It is also in many ways, shapes, and form profoundly uh, um, anti-human, in a sense. It lacks humanity. It takes away what defines us as human beings. It basically sees beauty and other such things as just these arbitrary, or these illusions, of reality. It helps to try to explain things simply by measurements and numbers and the technical aspects of them, and it robs us of our humanity. This view of scientism. Um, you know, when was the last time that you approached somebody that you were hoping to court and maybe eventually marry, saying giving them a pickup line like, "Oh, my chemicals, you know, are fluctuating for you, and let's mate and create offspring because that's what evolution tells us to do." I mean, that's not something that is human about us. That might be the technical definition of why human beings procreate, come together and such, but that is not how humans act or approach each other.
Hello, ladies. Does your man smell like me? No. Too bad.
We can define beauty as simply this reaction to the outside world through our perceptions of things, and how our chemicals react and all this other stuff. But that totally robs the meaning of it. It totally robs beauty from us. It just defines things in this rigid, ugly, mechanical way. And scientism is all about robbing people of their humanity. This is the real problem behind it, not simply its incoherence and its lack of verification, because it basically does fall upon itself. It does fall, you can basically sweep it from under its own feet. And it's basically just a bastardized form of logical positivism, which was dealt with a long time ago. And besides it being intellectually ridiculous, morally speaking, it provides nothing for us, and it's very dangerous. Now, the League of Reason is not only an example of this sort of ugly child of scientific fundamentalism, but it's also probably one of the greatest stories of irony, in the world. And what I mean by this is that they're an example of this new movement of atheism that is occurring in the world today, that is not only profoundly anti-religious, but acts just like the people that they oppose. And I want people to really understand this. The problem in the world is not religion. The problem in the world is not atheism. The problem in the world, for lack of better terms, are people who think too simply and are outside the bounds of reality. Now, I consider religion to be a big part of reality, be a big part of what it means to be human, in a sense. And whether you're an atheist or not, you have some sort of religious viewpoints, or at least a religious way of looking at the world through your particular worldview, whether it be through philosophy or some sort of a particular religion like Islam, Christianity, or Judaism. But the problem is within these systems, or lack thereof, is this fundamentalism, this idea that human beings can somehow be perfected, and that the other side, the people who don't think like you, are somehow savages or less than human in a sense. They both have the same ideas. They just have different labels for them. They both think in cliches. They both think of everything black and white except their own viewpoints. They only see the complexities in their own view. And they see the other person as the other. And they both, in the end of it all, they both will become frustrated when they can't change the other person, and they will eventually resort to the last thing, which is basically killing off whoever they don't agree with, which tends to always happen with these sort of minded individuals. And we've seen it in theistic societies, with theistic people, and we've seen it in atheistic people. People who don't have belief in God or any particular religion. I just have to bring up the atrocities of many Marxists. I have to bring up the atrocities many atheists in the 20th century. And people will say, well, it's not because of atheism. That's not the point. That's not the point of the objection. The point of the objection is to show that theism is not the only, is not the reason for people killing other people. The reason for this is a different thing. It's these utopian ideologies. You can be an atheist and still be a mass murdering psychopath. That's the point of that objection. It has nothing to do with atheists being worse than, theist or anything else. People often come back and say, well, communism and all these other ideas, these were like religion. And so somehow this saves atheists from being blamed or being put in the same category as everybody else. Because for some reason they want to be above the rest of humanity. This is somehow justification for them to continue thinking that religion is somehow all evil. When it just shows that they're profoundly ignorant about the human condition and reality. And that is that human beings are different. We all think differently, and we will eventually continue with differing ideas. And we're not all going to be of the same viewpoint, at least not by our own hands. So that really is the problem here. The League of Reason represents, for instance, a group of atheists that is an example of much of the ideology that we see today that's being propagated by people like Dawkins, Hitchens, Harris, and even to some extent Daniel Dennett. It is simply another form of fundamentalism that has no religion attached to it. Well, you could call it a religion. You could call it not the religion of atheism. You could call it the religion of science and reason. And I don't mean reason and science in their real forms. Like I don't mean when an Islamic terrorist, or a Muslim terrorist, uses Islam, or a Christian terrorist uses Christianity, or a Zionist uses Judaism. I'm talking about somebody who, I'm talking about concepts in the real, truest form. Science without trying to be applied to moral principles. Reason, not as a cliched statement used to basically make yourself look superior to everyone else, but reason as it is. Reason that sees things, sees reality. What we're dealing with the League of Reason and other atheists who follow that sort of line of thought is not reason, it's not rationality, it's not science, it's simply cliches, it's simply labels to hide anti-religiosity. That's it. It's simply labels to promote another utopia without a God attached to it. It's simply labels for the same thing that we're dealing with on the other side. They are the greatest irony because they are what they oppose. The League of Reason is not something of reason. It's made up mostly of individuals who are simply promoting an opposing ideology. And it refuses to look at the world in a balanced manner. It houses people like Thunderfoot, Anti-Boo, 86, and even to an extent D.P.R. Jones. They see the nuances in their own worldviews, and they neglect the others. They think themselves authorities on other people's worldviews, and at the same time promote ignorance of those viewpoints, meaning that those viewpoints aren't important enough to understand. Yet theirs are. They are not promoters of enlightenment. They are simply pawns to it. Salam.